Hey, Jerry.
Oh, okay.
Hey, I was having a hard time with this meeting, and I'm still having a hard time with it. Okay. I was having a hard time, so I just left the meeting and I went back on. I'm waiting for Steve Nathanson to come back on. I don't know. A lot of people are having a hard time
Yes,
with
he
a
has a
lot
little
of.
bit her second COVID shot yet, so not bad, but she'll be here just shortly.
All
Hello
right.
there.
Yeah, well, several people are having a hard time getting on to Zoom today. I don't know why. But yeah, I just ended the meeting and turned it back on to fix something, and it has yet to work. So let me
You're
just
great now.
yeah, I know, no, it's working like that. But if people are having a hard time, let me just. I'm putting it on YouTube. It's going to be on YouTube
Okay.
after, in case people miss it. Okay. All right. All right. So here's what I want to talk about today. I just want to mention, I don't know if you guys are comfortable, but next week, next Shabbos, I'm aiming for a minyan on Shabbos. Social distance and mask and everything, a short one, very short one. Extra short because it's a special Torah reading, and I almost have one anyways. We almost have a minyan. There's a guy visiting, and he's visiting Gun Sight. Have you ever heard of Gun Sight in
Yes, we
Paulden?
have. Yeah.
So he's I'm just kidding. I know. He's visiting Gun Sight, so he's coming for Shabbos. Myself. There's going to be a couple people, and then of course there's Purim next week. I just something that came up, and I guess it's a little bit even more relevant, unfortunately. It's something I want to talk about this week. Yesterday was the Rosh Chodesh Adar. Rosh Chodesh Adar is the month of Purim. It's a lucky month for the Jewish people. I'm just going to mute everyone. There's a background sound. It's a month of luck for the Jewish people. It's the month of joy for the Jewish people. The Talmud actually says that on the month of Adar, the Jewish mazel is healthy. It's very good. And the explanation for that actually in the Talmud is basically mazel. When we say mazel tov, mazel is defined, literally means constellations. But in other words, there's all sorts of spiritual energies that run the world. And they create something that's called nature. Everything that happens naturally in the world, every reaction, chemical reaction, is all by these spiritual energies which map out in the blueprints to the world. So there's a lot of things in the world which are bound to nature, right? But Jews are not bound to nature. Famous author Mark Twain is famous for saying that. Hamilton's famous for saying that. Jews are not bound to nature. But sometimes we put ourselves under nature and we become bound to nature. The story of Purim happened in this month. It tells us that ultimately we're not bound to nature. This is a special month. And this is a month where even if we bind ourselves to nature, we are actually above it. We transcend it. And that's why us Jews, we never let go. We never give up. We always pray. And we always see miracles in our lives. So that's the month of Adar. We're entering today, or we entered yesterday. Yesterday was the first day. Of course, we'll celebrate Purim a week from Friday. And it'll obviously be the most interesting Purim you've ever been to. It'll be semi-outdoors. This will be the first Purim where people say, wow, it's so good. Not that many people came, right? Because people are nervous of crowds. We'll actually probably have, hopefully it's going to be several hours long, and there will be like a Megillah reading every hour or so. And then people can come and, come one of the hours and, do things in a less social way. Of course, you guys who got the vaccine over there, if you feel comfortable, I don't even know yet. I saw Jerry wearing a double mask. He said he's going to be wearing it till 2022. I don't know, but we'll see how it goes. It'll be nice. And the beautiful thing about the Jewish calendar is the show must go on. You can't reschedule Purim. It happens on that day, whether you celebrate it or not. So that's as far as Purim goes. Now, today I wanted to talk about an interesting subject, even though it's Parshas Truma. And Truma is a beautiful Parsha about how to build a tabernacle. And the tabernacle is an incredibly beautiful structure. Beautiful, obviously, physically, but spiritually as well. It was an atonement for the golden calf, and it was the first time in history to that degree where God resided in the world in a revealed way with us. It was really an incredible thing. But today I just wanted to mention, talk about the subject of what we call in Hebrew a Meis Mitzvah. A Meis Mitzvah means a mitzvah burial, a mitzvah death. Literally, it is someone who dies without relatives, without friends. The Mishnah defines it as someone who dies and no one screams when they die. There's no voice, oh my gosh, he's dead, right? There's different opinions. Who are we talking about? Him screaming about pain, or we talk about the family. There's no family. It's a really special mitzvah, and we got to experience it last week, where I put a little thing on Facebook to raise some funds for Bernard Singer, who not a lot of people knew. I do know one person in the community who knew him, but he was a pretty quiet guy. He was a veteran from World War II. I put a little thing on Facebook, and just in 2 hours, it was overfunded. And I sent an email out, and it was overfunded. And all the way until Shabbos, people were calling me saying, hey, can I donate? Is it too late? And I told people, we got everything we need for it. This is a specific thing, you don't like to make it a cause, you don't like to bring in the funds with it, because something which happens and you never know, it could happen any day, and you'll need everyone's help. So you want people to know it's a special thing and a serious thing, and no one's trying to profit over it. Now, truth is, in Jewish law, and every Chabad rabbi knows, and every Jew essentially knows, is that if no one's going to do it, any Jew should do it at a loss. They should go and do it at a loss, and that's part of the mitzvah. But I want to talk about how great the mitzvah is and why people had such a drive to do it. And this is what I want to talk about today. It was just so inspirational for me. There's a verse that says, Mi cha'amcha Yisrael, who is like the Jewish people. They go, and there is someone they don't even know, someone they barely know. By total divine providence luck, I happened to have bumped into him one time on Sukkot a couple years ago. I happened to have known his Hebrew name, not his parents' Hebrew name. And that was just total fluke. I got a beautiful letter from the hospice that he was in, saying thank you, how they didn't know what to do. I was really touched by their letter. Of course, if you haven't heard, Irene Dannon passed away yesterday, a Holocaust survivor. She passed away, I guess, about an hour before Shabbos or so. I don't know exactly, 2 hours before Shabbos ended. It's something that we deal with. And there's the Jewish perspective, and there is definitely a special energy when Jewish people want to be part of it, and everyone's running to be part of it. So first and foremost, I would like to just mention something which I found super fascinating. Obviously, a lot of Jewish people know about the burial, but the burial is called the Chesed Shel Emes. You probably heard the term. Anyone raise your hands? You ever heard the term Chesed Shel Emes? It literally means kindness of truth, true kindness. It's mentioned a lot of times at the funeral. I want to mention the source for it. It's a very interesting source, interesting story. So in the Torah, we find that Jacob is in Egypt and he's on his deathbed. What does he do? He calls in Joseph. Joseph is a viceroy, and he knows he'll be able to get the job done better than anybody. He calls Joseph and he says, Joseph, do me chesed, do me kindness, do for me kindness, and do me truth. So the Midrash on that asks, it says, kindness of truth, true kindness, as opposed to false kindness. What is Jacob referring to? So I'll read the Midrash. It's a little bit humorous, if you like dark humor. He says, Vasisa imadi chesed ve'emes, do for me. Jacob says to Joseph, do for me kindness and truth. So the Midrash says, V'chiyesh chesed shel sheker, shu omer chesed ve'emes. Is there false kindness that Jacob is reiterating doing true kindness? Lama came. So mashal hedyot. The Midrash says there is a parable. So the Midrash loves stories, loves parables. Now there's holy parables, and there's what you call a mashal hedyot, which is a mundane parable. Usually when the Midrash says it, it's pre-saying, we don't really like this story, but we'll share this story. This is what regular people say, and it's not nice. So here's what it says. The Midrash says, Mashal Hedyet, this is like a story of a simple person, Mispre de Rachman Ta'un. When his friend's son passes away, he gets all involved, right? Because he loves his friend. He loves his friend's son. However, when his friend himself passes away, he doesn't get involved, right? So the Midrash says, why is that? Because when his friend's son passes away and he loves, he's friendly with him, he knows that his friend will see how he treats his children. However, when a friend himself passes away, his friend will not be able to see how he's treating him, right? So he says, okay, I don't have to attend his funeral, right? So this is what the Midrash says. This is a parable. It says this is why it's called kindness of truth, because his friend will not be able to respond, will not be able to pay him back. He won't get any satisfaction like, wow, you came to my son's funeral. You're so helpful. You brought over food, whatever it is. When his friend passes away, no one will be able to, so to speak, reward him or pay him back. He won't get any satisfaction on a physical level for doing his friend. So this is what Jacob tells his son, do for me. Chesed shalem, kindness of truth. I will not be able to repay you for bringing me back to Israel. That's what Jacob wants Joseph to do in Parshas Vayechi, in the end of Genesis. I will not be able to take you back, to pay you back. You won't get that satisfaction of me saying thank you, but do for me chesed shalemis. So we always mention, to a certain extent, all burials are chesed shalemis. Frankly, there's an attitude in the world that people say, well, I'm dead. After I'm dead, what do I care, right? What do I care where I'm buried? It's an interesting outlook, actually, because, a lot of times people who are suffering, they're suicidal, right? They commit suicide to end their problems. But who's to say that their soul will not continue having problems? In other words, they kill their physical body, but there's this whole side to the person that he doesn't see. And we know that it exists there because we know it does so much, but we just don't see it, right? So here also, when we're burying someone, in Yiddish term would be fleischike Augen, our material, physical eyes, when we bury someone, seems like nothing's happening. But really in Judaism, it's a very important thing, and it's a very important mitzvah, as we shall soon see. Now, want to add in, so obviously last week, everyone had like a really strong sense. I mean, I had so many people call me, even after we raised all the funds and I put it on, so many people call me and said, oh, we want to get involved. We want to be part of this. This is really beautiful that Jewish people do, and it's almost a sixth sense. Now, I also want to mention, I mentioned this before, but I find it so fascinating, and it really drives the idea home of, first of all, there's a couple of interesting details about burial that I want to share, which are in the Kabbalistic side of the Torah, but I want to share. There was a famous philosopher. His name was Rabbi Yosef Albo. He composed a book called the Sefer HaIkrim. He comes from the philosophical age in Torah. There are many, many sages who argue with him about all sorts of his perspectives. But one of the things he says in the Torah, it says, when someone dies, you should not over mourn. You should not over mourn. It says in the Torah, how would people over mourn? Well, other nations of the world would scratch themselves, they'd inflict pain on themselves, they'd pull their hair out. In Jewish law, there's a very specific set of rules of how to mourn, and you're not supposed to overdo it. It's considered a negative trait. The Rebbe, when his wife passed away, he was clearly very broken. And after 30 days, he said, I really feel like mourning a lot longer. But what can I do? Jewish law says 30 days and it's up. In this level of mourning, you got to move on in life. So the Torah sets us down. Now, I share an interesting story in just a moment. But the Rabbi Yosef Albo, he says, what do you mean the Jewish people are referred to with such great names in the Torah? We're called the children of kings, God's only child, right? How could it be? We should mourn extra when a Jewish person dies. Why is the Torah saying don't mourn so much? So he gives an interesting answer. He says a Jew has to know that death is temporary. Death is temporary. And when someone dies, they're going to come back to life. So the Torah tells us you see someone dying, you don't see their soul, you don't see their mission, you don't see, for some people, it's hard to believe that there'll be a resurrection, right? a resurrection of the dead. As I always mention, in our generation, we're lucky that it's easier to believe. We have so many movies about it and so much science, which seems to be going in that direction. But the Ikrim says, he says, look, you see that we can't overmourn because this person's going to come back to life. And he's not fully dead either. His soul is still around, right? So that's why the Torah is telling us not to overmourn. That's point number one about a burial. Point number two, I mentioned an interesting excerpt in the Talmud. The Talmud says in Shabbos, it says, just to give you the background, I was always, one epidemic in the world is cremation. On the Jewish scale, it's tremendously sad that, you can give perspective. You can imagine how bothered so many Jews were in the Holocaust, that their families were cremated. They were so bothered. And I even once heard a Holocaust say, he said, I'm getting buried as a Jew, even though I don't really believe in Judaism, because Hitler burnt enough bodies. It's very sad nowadays that there's a pandemic, that a lot of people want to cremate. You say, hey, what do I need after I die? What do I care where my location is, where my real estate is, right? Well, the truth is, the Talmud says something very interesting, and I found it as background for what the Rebbe writes to someone who wants to know how to explain that one should be buried. The Rebbe says, just like you would not burn a person alive, right, because they have life in them, and it would be a tragedy, tremendously painful. Similarly, after someone passes away, their soul still partly resides in them. They're still partially alive. And therefore, it's a total tragedy to burn someone, to cremate them. The Talmud actually says, and I found background from this in the Talmud gives a dispute between Rabbi Abou. Rabbi Abou says, everything you say in front of a dead person, he knows, right? So you have a dead person, you're doing a tahara, you're at a funeral, right? You're talking to him, talking about him. This is a tradition in Jewish tradition. You go and you ask forgiveness. You can talk to him. Rabbi Abou says everything you say before a person who died, he knows. Ad sheyistam yisasim hagoylem until his tomb is sealed with a top stone. Rabbi Yechia and Rabbi Shimon argued about this. One of them said it means he knows everything until he's covered over, and then he can't hear anymore. The other opinion says he knows everything until he decomposes. Once he decomposes, his soul moves on, right? So there's this dispute there, but they both agree. Now, we explained several weeks ago, but they're both talking about different aspects of the soul. There's a certain part of the soul that goes right up to heaven when the person dies, goes to the spiritual realms, but there's a certain part which stays in the body. And one of them is referring to a higher, loftier part of the soul, he says, goes away as soon as he's covered. The other one says, only once he decomposes can he doesn't hear anymore. But this is a very important thing. When someone passes away, they're actually alive. I know the Nathansons believe this because they talk to souls even after they leave the body, right? You can imagine how much more so a righteous person who doesn't decompose or an unrighteous person. Look online about people who don't decompose. I guarantee it'll gross you out. But there have been many people, there have been people like Lenin and stuff like that who purposely were not decomposed. But there have been people who scientifically, it's a fluke. And in Jewish tradition, of course, righteous people never decompose. So that is as far as this discussion goes, why it's so important to do burial. And, I'll never forget the first time we did a tahara here. We had a few guys from the community come, and I told them, okay, we finished now, talk to the body, pray, ask them for things. And it was very meaningful how everyone spoke to body as if he was alive, because he can hear and he's in the halfway zone. So that is as far as, obviously, it's saddening when in Jewish law, we ideally want someone to be buried right away in the same day, right? And it's saddening sometimes in America, it's held up. Our friend Bernard is still in Prescott. He's finally going to go to Newark Airport tomorrow, and they're going to bury him in the cemetery there. But this is chesed shalemus. This is true kindness. You won't get anything back. This is a tremendous mitzvah. I want to go over some of the sources and talk about how great this mitzvah is and why everyone jumped on the bandwagon. Now, first, we can measure how great this mitzvah is by how important it is for a Kohen who's not allowed to come in contact with a dead person, right? Anyone know about those laws? Yeah, we spoke about them many times. But before that, let's just read an excerpt from the Rambam. Okay, now I just want to give you an interesting perspective on things. In the Torah, this is going to blow your mind a little bit. In the Torah, it never actually says, hey, you have to bury all Jewish dead, have to be buried in the ground. Anyone aware of that? Jerry, you knew that? It's a great mitzvah. It's a great mitzvah, but I wanted to show you the verses. There was actually a Torah scholar, as in the mid-1900s and earlier, from about the 1700s until recent. Now it's not as common, actually. There were many Torah scholars who weren't so observant. Talmud and Torah and Jewish philosophy is amazing intellectual pursuit. And there were many people who studied it. And there was a guy who actually wrote, and he argued that perhaps it's not such an important mitzvah to bury people. He argued, and he took verses and he really meticulously. Rav Kook, the chief rabbi of Israel, wrote back a response to him explaining how he's wrong. But it begs the question, why, if God wants us to do it, why doesn't he say that directly? He say, this is the mitzvah to bury someone. Now, here are some samples of where we learn it out from the Torah, and you'll see what I mean. So here we have, Jerry, do you still learn Maimonides every day? Yeah?
Not every day.
We don't always do it every day, but we try to do it.
All
I don't
right,
know what we do that we're so busy, but you know.
Well, way at the end, I just want to show you something that it says here. Way at the end, it says, the 231st mitzvah is we're commanded to both bury those who have been executed by the high court on the same day of their execution. So here's where the Torah says it straight out. It says we are commanded to bury people who are executed by the high court. Now, what would happen? I don't know. Let's say you murder someone, there's witnesses, so you're executed. You get executed. How would they execute you? There are different ways of execution, and there are 4 ways of execution, depending on what you did. You know, you curse out God's name, you break Shabbos with witnesses, all sorts of different ways. So the Torah says, if someone's executed, they would at times hang his body on a tree afterwards, so everyone could see that there's repercussion in Jewish law, right? And then it says, you shall surely bury him. Right? It actually says kavur sikverenu. It says double lingo. It says bury him, surely bury him means literally like you should bury him, bury him. So Maimonides, based on this, in his book of mitzvahs, he says we have a mitzvah to bury someone. The source of this commandment, you may not allow his body to remain on the gallows overnight. You must certainly bury him on the same day. The Sifri says you must certainly bury him as a positive commandment. This is one of the ancient halachic books from the Talmudic era. So you have to bury him. You're not allowed to leave him hanging on the gallows. So the Rambam continues. Now, there are those who argue this is only talking about someone who is executed, right? A regular person, you don't have to bury him. Someone who is executed, you have to bury him. The Rambam says this law applies to all deceased. Every Jew should be buried on the day in which he passes away. This is the reason why a person who has nobody at his burial is called a Meis Mitzvah. The meaning of a Meis, dead person, for which the mitzvah is on every individual to bury. The mitzvah, too, is God's statement, exalted, you must certainly bury him on the same day. So some say the source of everyone being buried is because the Torah doesn't say to bury him. It says you shall surely bury him. So the Torah is coming from the attitude and saying, this is a guy who's a criminal, right? He's a criminal. Maybe we shouldn't bury him. It's so disrespectful not to bury someone. The Torah is saying you shall surely bury him. Even him, for sure him you should bury, teaches that all Jews should be buried. We also find by Jacob makes, Jacob and the forefathers, they all make such a big deal to make sure they're buried properly. Joseph, right? So we find that there's a mitzvah to be buried. Hey, Rochelle, how are you? So we find that there's a mitzvah that one should be buried. This is the source in the Torah. I'm just talking about, Rochelle, back you up. We're talking about the concept of a Meis Mitzvah. Meis Mitzvah is someone who dies. They don't have any relatives. We had one last week. And I put it on Facebook, and I was just so inspired to see that Jews, many who I don't even know, And even actually Gentiles who I know in Prescott donated to it right away, and we easily filled the funds. So we see from here that Maimonides says it is a positive mitzvah to bury someone. And now that is the commandment from Maimonides. Maimonides quoting the way he understands the Talmud and the Torah. Now we're going to talk about a Meis Mitzvah. Now we know in the Torah that a Kohen, right? You have a question, Rochelle?
I do. I just came on briefly. I just wanted to say that my brother died 2 nights ago.
I'm so sorry to hear.
I'm actually I'm with a rabbi from Winnipeg, and I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I just wanted to tell you I haven't really been talking, but you're all people I care about, and I just wanted to tell you. And now I'm going to go back to the other call, but anyway.
Thank you.
Well. I'm learning.
Thank you, Rochelle.
Okay.
Well, Hashem should comfort you, and comfort all the Jews and mourners of Zion of all deaths.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, I'll talk to you later.
So sorry to hear. So, this is, I guess another person passed away that I've come in contact this week. It's very, very heart-wrenching. I mean, we'll talk about that at the end. But we're going to learn how important it is that everybody goes. Just give me a second. All right, so we're going to go through the sources here and see how important it is to bury a Meis Mitzvah. Now, what we're going to see is the beauty of all this is it's very comforting, because in Judaism, we believe, the world kind of looks at it that life is temporary, get what you can done, and death is permanent. You can't go back. In Judaism, however, we believe that death is temporary and life is permanent. And we're going to see how far that goes. So here we have, I'm going to share a screen in a second. And here we have, I quoted some sources. This is from the Talmud. The Talmud says, so there are 2 people who are really, really forbidden to come in contact with a dead person. Does anyone know who these 2 people are? So these are the 2 people.
The Kohanim.
The Kohanim, yeah, and the high priest is the epitome of that. The Torah says that a Kohen, although he's not allowed to become impure to a dead person, he is allowed to his father, mother, sister, brother, son, daughter, or wife. His immediate relatives, he is allowed to become impure to. Right? You got that? So if you go to the cemetery, often the Kohanim are buried at the fence, right by the fence, so people can come visit them without going into the cemetery, right? But a Kohen is allowed to become impure to his father, mother, sister, brother, son, daughter, wife. A Kohen Gadol, a high priest, the Torah says, is not allowed to become impure to anyone. He's not allowed to attend his own family's funeral, right? He's not allowed to visit them in the cemetery, but he's not allowed to attend his own family's funeral. It may be devastating, but this is a mitzvah in the Torah. There is another type of person who is not allowed to attend a family member's funeral. The difference is he inflicts it on himself. Now, I don't want to, inflict is the wrong word. This is a Nazirite. Anyone know what a Nazirite is? A Nazir? Samson the Nazirite, you know what it is? Jerry, you know what it is?
They don't drink alcohol and let the hair grow, and they're very, very acidic.
So that's right. Nowadays we don't really have them actively. I did know a guy in Phoenix who decided he's going to be a Nazirite. He said he knew that there are problems with being a Nazirite and the Torah laws when the temple doesn't exist in Jerusalem, but nevertheless he grew his hair out. And I believe he still doesn't drink wine. He drinks like pomegranate wine or blackberry wine, things like that, because those are allowed. He's allowed to drink alcohol. He's not allowed to drink wine alcohol. And he grew his hair out. And what can I say? He became a rock star. Our very own from Phoenix. He's a singer. He moved to Cleveland, actually, but he's a well-known Jewish singer. Anyways, a Nazirite, one of the things a Nazirite's not allowed to do is he is absolutely not allowed to come in contact with a dead body. That body's impure. He's absolutely not allowed to come in contact. Now, the interesting thing about a Kohen is, so a Kohen nowadays would not allowed to become in contact with a dead body. Unless it's family. There's another exception. I'll say an interesting story. There is a story of Elijah the prophet. So Rabbi Akiva, anyone heard of Rabbi Akiva? Famous rabbi in the Talmudic era. Anyways, he dies a horrible death. He's murdered by the Romans and he's in jail. His corpse is in jail. And some rabbis go, they want to give him a proper burial. They go and lo and behold, who's burying him? Elijah the prophet. Elijah's there. Right? And he's burying him. And they come to say, we can't bury him. He said, no, I want to do it. Rabbi Akiva is such a great rabbi. So they say to Elijah, they say, wait, you're a Kohen. You're not allowed to do it. So Elijah answers to them. He says, it's true that I am a Kohen. However, Elijah is perfectly righteous. Rabbi Akiva is perfectly righteous. And a perfectly righteous person does not become impure. Right, so I am allowed to tend to it. This is in Jewish law. Ultimately, the Rebbe said that nowadays we don't know who are perfectly righteous, but there was a story in the 50s. There was a famous Rebbe who passed away. He was a Holocaust survivor, a famous Rebbe, and he passed away. And the Rebbe, one of his followers, asked the Rebbe, "Can I go to his funeral? You said that you shouldn't become impure." Shouldn't go to even a righteous person unless, nowadays we don't really know. And the Rebbe told him, he said, go and don't ask the question afterwards. In other words, he was saying, yes, he truly is righteous. Go and ask the question after. But a regular impure person that we don't know, we're not aware they are totally righteous. What is the law? So here we have this excerpt in the Talmud, and let's read it together. Everyone see it? Okay, so here it says it. It says, come and hear what is said in the Torah with regard to a Nazarite. He shall not become impure for his father or mother or his brother or sister in their death, for the crown of God is on his head. So a Nazarite is very, very holy. He's at excelled level of holiness. So he is not allowed to become impure. Since it was already written with regard to the Nazarite, he shall not come upon a dead body. Why is it necessary to elaborate and specify siblings? So we have two verses. You hear, Jerry? One verse of the Nazarite says he cannot touch a dead body. The other one says he can't go to his siblings, right? Why do we need two verses? Once we say a dead body, we know anyone. So the Talmud says they learned that the purpose, what purpose did the verse state and his sister? To teach us one who was going to slaughter his paschal lamb and to circumcise his son, which are both mitzvahs, which he fails to fulfill them. They have tremendous punishment. And he heard a relative of his died. I might have thought he should return and become ritually impure, with the impurity imparted by the corpse. The Torah says, you shall not become impure. The death of his relative will not override the significant mitzvah of the Torah. I might have thought, just as one does not become impure for his relative, so he does not become impure for a corpse with no one to bury it, a Meis Mitzvah. Talmud over, the Torah says his sister adds that his sister, he cannot become impure to her, to tell us that a Meis Mitzvah, he could become impure to. So a Nazarite and a high priest, they are allowed to go and bury a Meis Mitzvah. And anyone, even anyone who has a great mitzvah on their shoulders, that they are not allowed to be impure for, like the Paschal Lamb, the Torah says he can become impure for a Meis Mitzvah. So that is the reason why a high priest and a Nazarite can, here's a quote here from Maimonides, when a priest, even a high priest, encounters an unattended corpse on the road, he is obligated to become impure for its sake and bury it. What is meant by an unattended corpse? A Jewish corpse cast away on the road without anyone to bury. This is, the Rambam says, halacha conveyed by oral tradition. Okay, now, can anyone tell me why? Let's see if anyone can tell me why. Jerry, you hear me? Jerry. Steve, can you tell me why? Why do you think a high priest can go and bury a Meis Mitzvah? Anyone guess? What do you think? Again, this is a high priest where it is a thing to do. It's a sin for him to become impure. It's a tremendous sin for him to become impure. But nevertheless, the Torah says the Meis Mitzvah overrides the sin. So it's a thing to do. That's actually a really good answer, because Maimonides just said, he said, this is oral tradition. This is a law from Moses. It's an exception from Moses. We would not be able to think about it on our own. We would not think about it on our own. Now, just to add, what is the actual Meis Mitzvah? The Kohen, if he's walking on the street and he says a dead body, so there's two laws. One law is by Joshua. Joshua says, Meis Mitzvah konem makomo. If you see a dead body on the road, you're allowed to bury him in that place, be it private property, be it public property. You're allowed to bury him because he was worried. You know, some people don't have a burial plot, and we want to make sure he gets buried, right? So Meis Mitzvah konem makomo. Others explain that and say, you know, obviously that doesn't mean bury him in the middle of Sheldon Street. If there's a Jewish cemetery, move him over there, right? But if need be, if you don't have a place, you're allowed to bury him where you find him. So the Kohen's walking. This is what he needs to do. He needs to scream out, help, help. Anyone around here who can help me do this? If no one answers, the Kohen has the mitzvah on him to bury the dead. That is the Meis Mitzvah. Now, why did Joshua make a decree that a Meis Mitzvah acquires his own real estate? In other words, a dead person who dies and doesn't have everyone tending, he acquires his own real estate. So there's a rule in the Talmud called Kavod Habrios. Kavod Habrios is an interesting rule. It sounds really good at first, but it's kind of complicated. Let me just tell you what it is. Kavod Habrios means that it means to honor God's creations. There are certain things in the Torah, if they are too embarrassing or too they look too shameful, we have a mitzvah to fix them. And they even override other mitzvahs. I'll give you one example. So let's say you got to hear Megillah. Okay, Jerry, you're going to come hear Megillah in 2 weeks, and you bump into a dead body. Now you have a choice. Should you bury the dead body or hear Megillah? It's a mitzvah to hear Megillah. So what do you think, Jerry? What would you do? What would you do?
It's the
I call the cops and bury it.
no.
All right. Let's say you call the cops, and the phone call. Well, you know, you're gonna have to wait there till the cops come, right?
Okay.
So you're gonna have to wait there until the cops come. So what do? Wait or go hear Megillah?
We'll hear Megillah.
Okay.
Wait.
Wait.
You wait, actually. The Torah says that when it comes to a rabbinic mitzvah, or certain mitzvahs in the Torah, there's a list of them, then you override with a Meis Mitzvah. You go and you do the Kavod Habrios. You honor humanity. Honor humanity, that's literally the terminology. You honor humanity, and that overrides the rabbinic mitzvah of hearing Megillah, right? So if you have a choice, you got to bury. Now, let me give you another example. This is another example the Talmud gives, and I'm going to trick you guys up. I'm going to just show you some examples of this term, Kavod Habrios, which means honoring God's creations. Now, if you leave the dead body there, who knows what will happen? Nowadays, I'll just tell you on a personal note, I got a call on Thursday last week, and this guy's a veteran from World War II, right? But I got a call from the old age home, from the hospice home, and they said, can you help us honor him? He wants a Jewish burial. We don't know what to do. So I called Sinai Mortuary, and I have some friends over there, and for whatever reason, there are certain legalities which prevented them from picking up the body. So they said, if you don't reach the next of kin, what can we do? So the hospice said, well, we're trying to reach his daughter in Japan. We can't reach her. What should we do? So they said, call the county fiduciary, and they'll sign that we can take the body. They called the county fiduciary, and the county fiduciary said, we have a very simple process here. We'll expedite, we'll take him and we'll cremate him, God forbid. They said, unless your rabbi wants to go and just sign and get it done, right? So that is when I called the mortuary. I called the guy in New York, and I said, okay, let's take care of this very fast. There's a cemetery in New York that will take him for free, and we'll raise the funds and we'll send them there. But so that would be Kavod Habrios, preventing burning a body. Again, we said a body is essentially like a live body. It's not really dead. And burning it is a tragedy. So another example is if you leave it there, animals might eat it, right? Vultures might come. Those are all times when you get to override a mitzvah, a rabbinic mitzvah, in order to bury the body. Let's say it's Shabbos and you will need to travel. You wouldn't be able to do that. Another example is, let's say you're wearing tzitzis. You're wearing your talis and you're walking, and you realize that you're only wearing a talis. You're not wearing a shirt underneath. That's how they would walk around in the old days. They would wear like a poncho, big kind of dress. And you realize that your tzitzis broke, so you're not allowed to wear them. Do you have to take off your tzitzis and walk around without a shirt? What do you think?
No.
All right, so it depends. If it's Shabbos, then yes. If it's Shabbos, you have to take off your tzitzis to walk around without a shirt, right? If it's a weekday, then because it's dishonoring to humanity for you to walk around without a shirt, it's like disgraceful, you don't have to. Now, here's another interesting example. The Torah says you're not allowed to wear a garment of wool and linen mixed. Let's say you're walking and you look at the label of your shirt and it says 50% wool, 50% linen. Do you have to take off your shirt in the middle of the stock market?
Yes.
Yes, the law is yes. The law is yes. Kavod habrius cannot go against honoring humanity, can't go against God's word. But it can. But a rabbinic mitzvah, the prerequisite of rabbinic mitzvah is they could be overridden by kavod habrios, by honoring humanity. So it's actually interesting. There's certain nuances, exceptions in the Torah, where the Torah says kavod habrios. So let's say a Kohen, for example, or a Nazirite, they're not allowed to bury the. They're not allowed to become impure. But because we're honoring humanity, the Torah says, in order to honor this corpse, he is allowed to sin, so to speak, and become impure. It's not considered a sin because this is an example where the Torah says he's allowed to become impure in order to bury the dead. So that is an example. Now, just going back to shatnez, wool and linen, there's actually very interesting. The Talmud says, what do you mean? It's so embarrassing. So the Talmud says, better he embarrass himself in this world, and in the world to come, he won't be embarrassed that he wore wool and linen. So that's just a side note. So here we have a Meis Mitzvah. It's a very important mitzvah where everyone is supposed to go, even a high priest on Yom Kippur, right? If he's, Yom Kippur's his day, all right? Yom Kippur's his day. It's the holiest day of the year, the holiest person, the holiest place. He has a mitzvah to go and bury this body. And this mitzvah goes upon all the Jewish people. That is some excerpts from the Talmud and Jewish law. We learn from here that, how much more so, obviously our family and our friends are taken care of. And but when there's a mitzvah to bury someone who didn't plan anything, we shouldn't send any blame. This is a tremendous opportunity for Jewish people to go and invest in it and do the mitzvah together. I was looking actually for ancient, there's no greater in the Torah. Jewish law is pretty much the most important. And Jewish law itself says that a high priest has to become impure. We can all learn for ourselves how important it is. But I was looking in the Jewish tradition of some midrashim, and I'll tell you there's one interesting one in Leviticus. The Leviticus quotes a excerpt, a line from the Psalms, a verse from the Psalm number 41. I'll read you I'll read it to you. So it quotes a excerpt from the Psalm in Tehillim 41, and let me just find a good version. I'll share screen, and it says something really beautiful. $895 on that. $895 on that. Is someone in an auction house? Okay. So here's the Psalm here. This is a Psalm from King David. Here it says, Ashrei maskil eldal b'yemrayim al teoshem. Praiseworthy is he who looks after poor on a day of calamity. The Lord will rescue him. The Lord will preserve him and keep him alive, and he will be praised in the land. You will not deliver him to the desire of the enemies. So the Midrash says, what is this referring to? Someone who is fortunate because he looked after the poor and God will rescue him. This is referring to a Meis Mitzvah. So besides the tremendous mitzvah in it, it is also a great merit for the Jewish people that we're able to go and help someone who died who didn't have any relatives or no one to help him. For sure, this applies to someone who the Midrash says, the Mishnah says, when do you know it's a Meis Mitzvah? Until it's taken care of. It says, for example, until you have 4 people to carry the casket and you have the opportunity to do it, you are part of the Meis Mitzvah. So the Meis Mitzvah, until it's taken care of, everyone has a part in it. Now, that is as far. Any questions on that today? That we learned some of the laws there. It's something that you need to break the bank for. It's something which is super important amongst the Jewish people and brings a lot of merit to the Jewish people. Now I want to tell you something else which is quite interesting, which the Rebbe spoke about, and a lesson we learned from the Meis Mitzvah. So everyone here, raise your hand if you know about the second Pesach, Pesach Sheni. Sound familiar? All right. So in the Torah, you have Passover. Jerry, Steve, myself, and wives need to eat from the Paschal lamb if they find themselves in Israel, right? It's a very big mitzvah. If you're impure, you can't do it. So the Jewish people, the first Paschal lamb is in Egypt. Everyone took a lamb into their house, right? It was one of the Egyptian deities. And then they sacrificed it and they barbecued it. I don't think they were able to smoke it. I think it had to be roasted. Anyways, they eat from the Paschal lamb. Comes a year later, and there are Jewish people who want to do it in the desert, the first Pesach in the desert, commemorating the first Pesach, the actual Passover, and they are impure. So the Talmud says, why were they impure? So there are different opinions. One opinion says they were doing a Meis Mitzvah. They had to become impure. They had no choice. There was someone who died, who had no one to bury him. They went and they buried him. So they come to Moses and they say, we want to do the mitzvah also, right? And that's the story. And Moses says, you'll do it at the second Passover. So the Rebbe actually learned a brilliant and beautiful lesson. He said, sometimes in America and in the world, you walk through the street and goes walking the spiritually dead, a chalal, someone who doesn't know anything about Judaism, and he's a Jew. And a person might say to himself, oh, why should I deal with him? He's a self-hating Jew, right? Why should I deal with him? Let me stick to my Judaism. Let me go and study more. I'll do more mitzvahs. I'll perform the mitzvahs with more beauty. Comes the Torah and tells us that a person has to do a Meis Mitzvah. When you see someone that you can help in a Jewish way, you have to go do it. Now, a person might say that, if I do that, I'm going to miss out. I'm going to miss out on my own. Comes the Torah and tells us that you will get a second Passover. God will find a second chance for you. And not only that, but it'll be even greater. So we have the physical idea of the Meis Mitzvah, the material idea of the Meis Mitzvah, which is a someone who dies, which everyone has a mitzvah to go after and everyone wants to do. And we have the spiritual idea, someone who's spiritually dead, that we have a mitzvah to go help him, even if it will hurt us, even if we will have less time and less focus on our own spirituality. Now, there's an interesting, that was a story the Rebbe said, and then he said a little story. In Chabad, in the rabbinic dynasties, there was always much respect to the whole family of the rabbis. Especially certain rabbinic families, it was felt like King David's family, their whole family is righteous and very holy. Anyways, the Rebbe said in that Sfaring, and he said in the Beis Harav, in the house of the Chabad Rebbes, there was one of the guys was a shlemazel. This is what the Rebbe said. He was a shlemazel. Now everyone knows what a shlemazel is, right? We know that a shlemiel spills the soup, shlemazel gets spilled on, and a nudnik asks what type of soup it was, right? But he was a shlemazel. Anyways, they wanted him to go into business a little bit, make some money. So they gave him some money, and they said, go to the marketplace, go to the fair, and try and find something you could buy cheap and sell for more money in the city. Right? So he went, and anyways, on the way there, he met with someone who said, my daughter needs to get married. I have no money. The wedding's not going to happen. In the olden days, this was common practice. The wedding's not going to happen unless I pay a dowry. Please, could you help me? He said, how much do you need? He said, how much do you have? No, I'm just kidding. He said the exact amount that this fellow had. Anyways, he counted his money and said, you know what? I don't need to go to business. You take it. You marry off your daughter. He came back and people, some of his family was upset. There's money to get the time to give tzedakah, but this is your principle. Go make some money. Anyways, the Rebbe said this fellow, he went and he actually became one of the wealthiest people in the family. He became a Ashir Gadol. He became a huge philanthropist. God blessed him. God always finds a way to help the people who help the Meis Mitzvah, even if it breaks the bank. This is a mitzvah, even the Kohen Gadol, he becomes impure. The high priest becomes impure for this. But God always finds a way to bring him to a higher place, a holier place. And this is why it was such a special mitzvah. And it was so beautiful. Just to mention in the beginning, I asked a question. I said, why isn't that the Torah doesn't specify the mitzvah of burial super clearly? The Torah is famous for being super clear about some things. Certain things are not. Here we said the mitzvah is essentially expressed by someone who was capital punishment. And that brings people to the mistake that maybe only someone who had capital punishment needs to be buried. Maybe someone else can be cremated or whatever it is. So the Rebbe actually, there's a famous Kabbalist, and he asks a similar question. He says, if you look in the Torah, and this is one of the most famous questions in Jewish tradition, we believe in Mashiach, we believe in the resurrection of the dead, we believe in everlasting spiritual reward. Where is it in the Torah? Did you know it almost doesn't mention it in the Torah? It's hinted in several places, but it almost doesn't talk about it in the Torah. This is a famous philosophical, theological question. So there's many, many answers given to this. But I want to share one of my favorites that I saw from a rabbi from the 1400s, 1500s. He said, Adam, before Adam sinned, he wasn't meant to die. Before Adam sinned, he wasn't meant to die. When he sinned, he died. He brought death to the world, and now we all die. We all need to be buried. However, what's the default? The default is humans are not meant to die. Scientifically, we shouldn't die. What happened was he brought death to the world, so it changed. Actually, the Avodas HaKodesh, he kind of pokes fun at all the great rabbis who say things like naturally, scientifically, people are meant to die. And he says that's really not the Jewish philosophy. Jewish philosophy is people are not supposed to die. Adam brought death to the world. We were born into reality, but our reality is not the true reality. He said that's why the Torah doesn't talk about everlasting reward so much. What we're supposed to do is just live until we get everlasting reward. Unfortunately, Adam sinned, the Jews went into exile, et cetera, and the Torah needs to hint reward and say, even if you're in a reality where there is death, you will be rewarded, there'll be an end to it. But the truth is Jewish people are, when we die, and death, the idea of death in the world is just temporary. This is a fundamental in Jewish belief, and this is why perhaps burial is not so mentioned clearly in the Torah. We weren't supposed to bury people. Adam sinned. We did some sins in the world. We sinned at the golden calf. That brought death into the world, which is temporary. And therefore, if you die, then you need to be buried. We need to give our bodies, return our bodies to where God wants them and get them ready for the resurrection of the dead, where the prophets promise, they promise that death will eventually be swallowed up, and truthfully, everyone will resurrect and live forever. So any questions, we'll stop here, but that is just a touch of the importance of burial and a Meis Mitzvah, and something we experienced. Unfortunately, as I mentioned before, Irene Dannon passed away yesterday. It's very sad. And I just got a call, Rochelle's brother passed away. And I got a call. There's another Holocaust survivor who was from Auschwitz, who was at the Hanukkah drive-in. She just called and said that her daughter passed away. And these are all very sad occasions. But as Jews, it's always important to remember what kept us going is we always remember that this is temporary, and that, we'll bury the bodies and prepare them for the resurrection of the dead of the coming of Mashiach. May it happen before Purim, and we could spend Purim normally in Jerusalem, right? In person, without masks. Well, with masks, with Purim masks.